It's my privilege today to interview Sandra Lubarsky and Marcus Ford. They are two people who have been doing for many years locally based education and earth-based education with a conscious focus on the development of a more ecological civilization. I'd love to give you guys the chance just to talk about your work over the past years, and then I'll have a few questions for you. I don't know who wants to start.
Great.
Okay, I guess I'll start. So we're both former, newly retired professors, and we've taught for 10 years in a small liberal arts college in the Midwest, but most of our careers has been in what we call mid-sized universities of about 30,000 students. And we've both been active in establishing programs and trying to get these large universities to focus more attention on environmental and social justice kinds of issues, and have had some success. But our dream is to break out of that model of higher education and establish a very small liberal arts college, if you will, with only one major, a major in sustainable communities, or a major in ecological civilization, or whatever the language is. And so we've been working for the last couple of years with that in mind.
Right. So, you know, of course, there are many things that large universities do well, but it's so clear that we've had a breakdown of community, and that students aren't, we can't necessarily assume that students know how to do the work that they really want to do in the world. And so the hope is that this is a kind of education that will help students, provide them with both the theoretical grounding and the values and the way to articulate their values and the skills that they need to go into their communities and in many cases rebuild them, prepare them for this tremendous transition that's coming our way. And so it's a new experiment in how you do that in a formal educational institution. What we think is best is that it be a very small, locally based institution where the community is the campus, and where the intelligence that's embedded in the community is accessed by the students.
If you could have an ideal location, would you put it in the suburbs, on a farm, in the mountains? Just imagine for us that you had the funding to rent the space and to have that be your campus. What would you choose?
Well, the important thing is that it's a community. And so, I mean, one of the problems with the way higher education has been structured most recently is that it really has been isolated from the community. So that even the way parking, to get onto a major campus, it's so difficult because of the way parking is structured. I mean, that's a clear signal that there is this divide between the community and the campus. So it has to be, again, in a community where there's a porousness between the university or the college and the community. For us, the perfect place is Flagstaff, because that is our home. It's where it's a vibrant, progressive community with facing all the issues I think that American communities are facing and will be facing in the next decades. Mm-hmm. So I love the ocean, so I'd love it. I wish Flagstaff were by the ocean.
but I don't think there is one ideal location for this kind of college. I think one of the most famous tiny colleges, perhaps the most famous one, Deep Springs, is located out in isolation and out in the high desert on a farm. Wyoming Catholic College is kind of modeling itself after that, and they're establishing themselves out on a ranch. There's a group of people up in Sitka, Alaska, that is kind of an offshoot, or at least imaging themselves after Deep Springs, a lot of ties with Deep Springs, and they're going to do it in downtown Sitka, Alaska. And there's a group in Wisconsin that is doing it in a more rural setting. So I think, I mean, my hope for the future is that in addition to big state universities, that there would be hundreds, if not thousands, of small colleges, and some would be in isolation, some would be downtown, some would be in the suburbs, some would be in small towns. They'd be everywhere. So the location, I think, is every location has its own advantages and opportunities. But for us,
could you talk a little bit about some of the concrete principles that make these examples you just cited examples of movements toward ecological civilization? What makes them ecological? What makes them moving in that direction, in your opinion? Just some of the qualities that come to mind.
Well, again, Mark is more knowledgeable about these small schools. I would just say that many of the newest schools that are coming online are influenced by Rudolf Steiner's philosophy. So that's Thoreau College in Wisconsin and Outer Coast College in Alaska.
And by the way, can we make a plug, if you agree, to Robert McDermott's new book on George Steiner? Have you seen that?
I haven't.
It's a major tome that he claims is sort of the normative understanding of Steiner's progression and influence. Sorry to interrupt, but I think that's an incredible resource.
And for us, of course, we are going to be process philosophy based. I mean, we're intentionally intended to be a Whiteheadian informed educational system or philosophy. I think, you know, clearly one size doesn't fit all, and not all of these tiny colleges are earth-centered or making sustainability the focus of their effort. But in our case, I mean, I just want to get back to your question about where it's ideally located. For us, what we're really trying to do is enable students to be engaged in the democratic process, to prepare them for the new economy and all of this conversation. I mean, we do need a new economic system, to prepare them to work locally and to have tools for resilience. So for us to be in a local community within and not isolated from these relationships is
nice.
fundamental.
Nice.
Yeah.
Marcus, are there any other features of these experiments that you guys would like to appropriate, or that you'd want to have others who are thinking about this appropriate themselves?
Well, two features. One, I think it is very important to be small or very, very small. So you have these close interpersonal relationships between students with one another, but also faculty and students. So I think this is a case where size matters, and that very small is preferable to any, you know, even a small liberal arts college of 2,000 or 3,000. There's still barriers that are put up just by the sheer numbers. So I think size is one factor, and I think another factor is what you might call the ethos or the worldview of these schools. That I think it's essential that it have a kind of moral dimension to it, and that it sees the world as interconnected. And some of these tiny colleges don't have an environmental focus, but their focus is on serving society. And I think in this day and age, there's no way you can serve society without being engaged in environmental issues. So in some cases it's implicit. In our case, it'll be much more explicit. So moral dimension and being small are two features.
What do you guys think are some of the features of the pedagogy of a college aimed at ecological education? Talk to us about how the teaching for you would take place.
Well, the first thing I would say is, and it would be transdisciplinary in structure. And I think a lot of these small colleges haven't yet broken out of that disciplinary mold. This, you know, the subject is life, as Whitehead said, and that requires that we not be bounded by these disciplines. The second thing is that it be highly experiential, that there be this effort pedagogically to overcome this split between mind and body, between heart and thought, and that again, that students have the opportunity not just to watch, not just to think about how things are done, not just to watch how they're done, but to actually be engaged in the doing of them.
Nice. So hands-on pedagogy, not the dichotomy between the theory in the classroom and then either nothing or some kind of activities outside of the classroom. For you, they're fused.
Yes.
Right, and they're fused in a way that I think is, again, in the making, that right now we have in a lot of universities that we send students into internship programs. Now, those internship programs, some of them can be very good. It all depends upon who your supervisor is and how it's structured. But nonetheless, there's something kind of artificial about that. And it's set aside, and now you will do your internship. You've read this material, now you will go do your internship.
Yeah.
And that, I think, again, that break needs to be overcome, that split.
What are the outcomes? What would your ideal students who graduate from the college be able to do? And what would they want to do?
Yeah, I think, again, it's going to be, because it's going to be highly tailored to individuals. So in my background, I've developed a master's program in sustainable communities and an undergraduate program I've been engaged with in sustainable development. I think our students will go the path of many of those graduates, and that is to work in their communities, all kinds of nonprofit organizations, municipalities. I've had students go into a lot of food system work, health work, not as health practitioners, but as people who are helping to design these organizations.
Yeah. Go ahead, please, David.
I mean, again, in the modern paradigm, there's so much emphasis on what will they be able to do or what kind of jobs will they get when they come out, and that all that is somewhat understandable. But in some ways, I think what we need to do is kind of shift the outcome question and say, what kind of people will they be when they graduate? And my hope is that there'll be people who understand themselves in relationship to the wider world, and that will see that their own best interest lies in solving these bigger problems, that they'll see themselves not as an individual who needs an income in order to support themselves, but they'll be a person who sees themselves is tied into this community, this country, this world. And of course they will need some kind of employment. Of course, there's many opportunities for doing good work in the world. But I don't think that that's the central question that people should be asking when you say, if I go to this school and graduate, what kind of job will I be able to do?
That's a great answer. The kind of formation that you guys envision and that you see happening around you is the development of persons and not just adding a few skills. I would love to do a whole interview on your previous work in sustainable community and sustainable development. Could you just put 3 bullet points on the table, not about overall goals, but just 3 things that you did, 3 things that you built into the program that we might hold up as paradigms for others who are involved in a similar work?
Sure. I think some of what we did well, I think, in those programs was first the transdisciplinary approach to education. So it was inquiry-based education, not discipline-based education. So students had the capacity to be in a classroom asking an important question and being able to bring material from all different disciplines to bear on answering that question. The second thing I would say is that we worked hard to provide students actually with a set of skills, so that, these are people who are hungry to go out and make a difference. So how do you make a difference? that was one of the guiding questions. What do you need to know in order to do the good work that you want to do in the world? And sometimes, to a great extent, a lot of that is pretty nuts and bolts kinds of things. I need to know how to do grassroots fundraising. I need to know how to produce a newsletter. I need to know how to do videography work. So we provided students with access to those pieces.
Nice. Yeah. So in our last few minutes, I'd like to move back from the nuts and bolts, the details of location and pedagogy, and talk a little bit about the broadest values that drive your work and how they're linked not just to individual goals, but to something so broad as societal change, or we here would call it civilizational change. You do use the word ecological civilization, which means such a major transition, but also so that what comes out is built around ecological principles. And I wonder if you could just talk about the broadest picture that motivates the work that you guys have done over the years.
Go first.
Whether it might be a highly personal answer, and it might be more, broader principles. I don't know.
I would say that the process philosophy has been so formative for us that we have really felt that there is this need to overcome the bifurcations that have marked the modern mentality in that split from each other and from the natural world. So how do we reconnect with the source of life? And I would say, and then for my own work, of course, beauty has been a guiding principle. And the question I've wondered is, how do we create beauty-centric education? Which, of course, is another way of saying value-based education, and an education where value is intrinsic to all beings.
That's a beautiful answer. I love that answer. Did you want to add anything, Marcus?
Well, I just want to answer this in a kind of personal way, that I've had a personal frustration with higher education, and I've taught it now 3 different institutions. And so I don't think it's tied to any one particular institution. And there seems to be just this radical disconnect between what's happening in the real world and what's happening in higher education. And it seems, we hear these over and over again, that education is the answer to all of our problems, but it doesn't seem to be the way we have formulated education now. It seems to be part of the problem. And so after, again, many years of trying to work within existing institutions, it just seems like, in part, it will be fun to break outside these institutions and try to address the issues that I'm convinced are really, really important. And I don't have any illusion that it will transform higher education overnight. But I do think that there are a handful of students around the country that will find this kind of education really important. And right now it's not available. So, the idea of being able to offer something that's important to people who want it is really exciting.
Yeah, beautiful. Let me ask as a closing question, and it's the big question. When you think of the kind of education that you guys aspire to and the kind of experiments you've been involved in and are now involved in, there's so many sectors that could contribute to this change to an ecological civilization. What is the role that education can play in its most ideal, its most successful, its most powerful form? Why education, why ecological education as maybe the sector that's most important in societal transformation toward ecological civilization?
Yeah. Again, I believe that we live in a complex society. It has many educational needs, and it should have an array of educational institutions meeting those various needs. But it seems like a fundamental need of every civilization is a way of preparing young people to understand themselves and their responsibilities to the wider community, their place in the universe, and to kind of ground them and to provide a context for all these more specialized forms of education. And it's just a sweeping generalization about higher education in the United States. We've almost completely flipped it around, and we have put almost all the emphasis on these very particular and in some ways useful forms of knowledge, but we haven't given them any wider vision, any grounding, any context. And so that's, I think, just absolutely crucial. And I don't think state universities, the dominant form of higher education, are now set up to do that. So there are some private liberal arts colleges that can do that, that have been doing it, some that could take that on, but that's the missing link, I think.
That's a great answer. Sandra, take us out.
I think that higher education is, to put it in, to frame it in Whiteheadian terms, it is a formal, intentional public form of concrescence, where you have all of this data coming into you. And the university or higher education is a place where we can say, first of all, let's drink in all of this information. But now what are we going to do with it? We have to figure out how to coordinate it in positive ways, in beneficial ways. And that is that process of contrast and of harmony and of unification of diversity. And that's what I think universities, higher education is involved in doing when it does it well. But it is, as Mark said, it is a process of wider and wider coordinations. The way it's structured right now is narrower and narrower processes.
Well, thank you guys so much for doing this podcast and for the work that you're doing. And we send our complete support and hopes that what you now aspire to, that you'll succeed at.
Thank you so much.